I'm old enough to remember SkyMall magazine, and that publication being my last resort of things to read on a flight, especially after a long flight, after I've been burning through the last couple of magazines I had in my briefcase after a business trip. Since there was no Wi-Fi on planes back then, that SkyMall magazine sometimes was your last hope of entertainment on a long flight. Back in the early 2000s, I had this job that required me to travel to a couple cities a week every week for a number of years. That time also happened to be during the early stages of my watch enthusiast journey. I mentioned in a previous video that my first serious watch that I ever purchased for myself was a Breitling Crosswind back in 1999. But even before then, my infatuation started in the military as I purchased this Victorinox Swiss Army's watch when I was in the Marine Corps in the early 1990s. From that point forward, I was hooked on watches. Now back to the SkyMall magazine. For those of you that remember it, you probably remember they used to showcase this inexpensive watch company called Steinhausen. And they have these watches. They are $130 or something like that, and they look like these high-end fashion watches. Most of them had Roman numerals, fake jewels on the end of the crowns and chrono pushers. And I was curious about these watches because some of the models had these interesting lugs. But they look like high-end IWC or Cartier knockoffs with quartz movements. I never bought one. I never owned one, even though I did find them interesting. Now, as the years went by, like most watch enthusiasts, I eventually went down the Vostok rabbit hole. And my curiosity was always piqued by the Vostok model 2209, the one that had swivel lugs or what they would call swing lug designs. I never ended up owning one since I think, and correct me down below in the comments if I'm wrong here, but I think they had 18mm lugs, and that was my biggest deterrent. But I always found them interesting, that swivel lug watch. So I was hunting for one that would be more appropriate for my wrist and the style I was looking for. Now, a few years ago, I'd found out that Glycine made this F104 watch, but I also missed my window of opportunity when it became discontinued several years ago. There's a couple of different sizes, and the more common size was the original 48mm version. At one point, they released a 40mm version that you see in my hand. So, back then, of course, over the years, I've been hunting for one, and I finally found one with a black dial. They did make a few other dial colors, one in beige, and I think the other one in blue, but I think that was it. So after all of these years of searching and hunting for one of these, I finally have it. So I'm sure you want to know, how do I like it? How does it wear? And what are my thoughts on the swivel lug design? And would it be right for you? Well, let's try to answer some of those questions and dive right into it. We're going to start with the swivel lug design. As you see, with the Glycine, it's a round 40mm case, which I find is an interesting design choice. Being a round case, it ends up wearing kind of small, but the lugs are attached by these pins, which allow the lugs to swivel up and down. And this design is intended to increase comfort on the wrist. No matter if you're wearing a swivel lug watch over a flight suit or on the wrist, the swivel lug design really allows for maximum flexibility during wear. And I have to admit that this design works very well as intended. When I'm wearing this watch, it literally disappears on the wrist, and I forget I'm even wearing it. Part of that may be due to the swivel lug design. The other part of it may be because of the dimensions of this particular watch. Like I just said, the Glycine 104 has a 40mm diameter round case, but it's just over 9mm thick. And every time I handle a watch with a generic Swiss movement, which we're going to discuss in a minute, I always ask myself, why can't other watch brands do this? Make a thinner watch. One of the best features of this watch is it is so super thin. Being thin and 40mm, then add the swivel lugs, it literally hugs the wrist when you're wearing it. But there are some things that I don't like about this watch, and it has nothing to do with the design. Matter of fact, I really like this watch with one major exception. It's fully polished. And because it's fully polished, this watch to me feels more of a dress watch than a tool watch. But I guess if that's the look you're going for, then this watch is pretty damn cool to you. For me, what doesn't add up is this watch does look more like a dress watch on the surface, but the watch itself is a Flieger watch. The F104 is a Glycine, and Glycine is synonymous for and has a long history of making aviation timepieces. I would have been head over heels for this watch if it was all brushed and didn't look so dressy. If it had more of a tool watch vibe, I think I would have really enjoyed this timepiece more. But then again, that is a personal preference. But the watch itself, it's really cool. Let's talk about some more of the specifics of the Glycine F104. As I mentioned, the watch is a 40mm diameter watch. The swivel lugs are an easy 20mm lug width, which accommodates all sorts of straps. And the thickness of the case, like I said, is just over 9mm. But if you turn the watch over, you'll notice that there's an ETA 2824 movement, and it's held in place by an all-steel movement holder, and the details of the watch are etched into the holder itself. Almost the entire caseback is a sapphire crystal, and it's secured by 6 tiny little screws. Now, as you can see, this watch only has 3 atmos of water resistance, which is only 30 meters of water resistance. That's not uncommon for a Flieger or a dress watch, but in my opinion, the see-through caseback, it steals the show. I mean, how many of you have opened the caseback of a watch that's a closed caseback and you were just disappointed to see that the Swiss automatic movement of the watch you just purchased was held in place by this plastic movement holder? Yep. Yeah, I've been there, done that. When I say that the see-through caseback steals the show, I should say almost, because if you take a look at the dial of the Glycine, that F104 dial, it's really beautiful. It's a flat black dial, but take notice of the very thick, slightly angled chapter ring with minute hash marks and numerals in 5-minute increments around the dial. The white sword-style handset is so legible on this watch, and it has this long white minute hand. It slightly overlaps the chapter ring alongside the white second hand, which stretches to the outside of the minute tracks. The contrast of this white handset over a black dial is my favorite combination because of the extreme legibility it provides. As a Flieger style aviation watch, this is a paramount feature of any timepiece for a pilot. And notice how the Glycine emblem is raised. I'm sure there are other Glycine watches that do this, but I've owned a couple Glycines in the past which have been awesome timepieces, like the Base 22 and the Combat. And as I recall, the Glycine emblem was always printed on the dial, never an applied logo. These little subtle details on this watch, like that raised logo and the ghosted F104 dial, it just really surprised me and impressed me after having the watch in hand. The crown is a push-pull crown. It's an onion style, which is pretty synonymous with aviation timepieces. And the crown also displays an embossed Glycine logo, and it's about 8 millimeters in diameter. It's really easy to grip, easy to wind, and easy to manipulate. The only real complaint that I had with this watch, aside from being all polished, was the supplied riveted leather strap. As you can see, I removed the buckle from the strap because the OEM strap is extremely short. And every comment I read on the internet and on forums said the same thing, that the strap is just too small. If your wrist is wider than 7 inches or 180 millimeters or so, it's just not going to fit your wrist, the OEM strap. But that's fine, because it has 20 millimeter lug openings in the swivel lugs, so putting on your own strap is really easy to do, and it's got drilled lug holes. So from here, there's 2 questions I want to answer for you right now. The first one is, what about a swivel lug watch? Personally, I think more brands should explore the swivel lug design. I love the idea around it because it makes wearing the watch extremely comfortable. And it's a design choice you just don't see all the time, and I love that. The second question is, what do I think about the Glycine F104 itself. Personally, I think the watch is extremely well made. I love the dial, the handset, the legibility, and how they did the case back. The movement is great. Mine runs really accurate. It's a Swiss movement. What I don't love is the fact that it is all polished. It's almost like a dress watch, made for people like me that wear tool watches. But in my case, I would just rather wear a smaller dress watch when appropriate. Since this is only 40 millimeter and the watch head is basically all dial, it does have a lot of wrist presence. So it's a little big for me for a dress watch, but for those of you that don't ever have a need to wear a dress watch, but you'd like to have a watch that could take that role on that rare occasion that you need one, well, personally, I think this could be a great choice for you. If they came out with this watch with some brushed surfaces, I would be all over it. Now, speaking of availability, a few years ago, and I'm not certain when, I assume it was about when the Invicta group took over Glycine, the F104 was discontinued. And you would see them on the gray market dealer sites like Drop for about $400. Now, they're obviously harder to find. Every once in a while, you'll see on eBay for $400 or $500 for some of the 40 millimeter size versions. The 48 millimeter models are obviously more readily available. They're just not as popular. But some of those 48 millimeter versions, they have hand wound movements and display case backs, which are pretty cool if you like a larger, more authentic Flieger watch. But these F104s, they are becoming more uncommon as time goes by. So if you're interested in these models and you see one, you may want to scoop it up. Hey, but who knows? Maybe Glycine will reissue a new one in the future. And if we're lucky, they'll release one in an all brushed stainless steel option. Anyway, I'd love to hear from you down below in the comments. What has your experience been with these Swivel Lug watches? Do you like them? Have you ever owned one? Would you ever own one? And what do you guys think of the Glycine F104? Well, if you made it this far, let me introduce myself. My name is Blake. I'm a bit of a watchaholic. And my guess is if you made it this far, you're probably a watchaholic too. So thanks for spending your time with me. I know how valuable it is for you. So thanks for tuning in. Give me a thumbs up, and I'll see you guys in the next video.